Hi Guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and for this week in our 43rd episode we will be taking a close look at Rainbow Islands. But before we jump right into that, let's have a look at this week's news. Now this is nothing major, well it is quite major for the show, but a chap called Stu Tube has left an iTunes review which has got me quite excited because we haven't had one in ages, and I think that takes our total up to 10, which is certainly something worth celebrating. Now, I can't believe we've got just 10 reviews and we're up to our 43rd episode. By God, if anybody listening to this show has got iTunes or are running the show through that, please leave us a review, because it's the only way to get noticed in the podcast world, and I want to help grow the show and increase numbers and things, and that's as close as I get to begging, so please help out. Now, something special did drop through my door this week. It's basically the CD32 Scene magazine. Now, this is the first issue. It's an A5 mini magazine, almost like a booklet in that sense, and it's about 39-40 pages long. It's quite packed, despite it sounds small at A5, but there's quite a lot of stuff in it. The cover is very, very shiny and glossy. The paperwork is absolutely fantastic. Usually get smaller books like this, and because of high cost of printing and things, people don't really get the paper quality, but I'm quite happy to say that the guys behind it have gone and done an amazing job with this, and the quality is just about perfect. Now inside you've got things like news sections. It does come with a cover disc which is fully CD32 compatible. I'm just reading the back of it now. It even comes in its own glossy cardboard cover. I'm very impressed with the look and the quality of this stuff. You've got a full game included called Lumberjack Revisited, which is apparently an exclusive version. Now, I do not have a CD32, despite doing the history episode recently. I'm quite sad to say I've still not been able to get one, but I've got my eye on one on eBay at the moment, so who knows, maybe soon. Other demos are Heroes of the Garluff, or the Garlaff, I can't read that properly. This is an exclusive. I don't think they do demos of it anywhere, but you can usually pick that up for about £5 in digital form. I've got a copy, but I've not played it properly yet. Something called Zero Sphere, again an exclusive demo. A free public domain game called Alcocopter, we've mentioned that before, and a full game of Bombjack Beer Edition, which has been CD32 enhanced, so I don't know what they've done with that. It's probably improved music and things, and a bonus CDXL video introduction, which is an exclusive. My God, I haven't got a CD32. I really want to play this. It looks great from all the pictures. Yeah, I can only look at it in pictures. I mean, even on my PC, if I wanted to run it on an emulator, I haven't got a really CD drive because I did away with it years ago. The magazine comes with full instructions for all the games. There's a news section, few reviews of Worthy, Reshoot, and Lumberjack Reloaded. I'm not sure if that's the exclusive game that they've just reviewed. Then you've also got mentions of the public domain scene. There's a section dedicated to the A to Z of CD32 games. That's several pages effectively of mini reviews for loads of official releases. CD32 previews, which is the latest upcoming physical games. A reader zone to do with community-based letters and polls. I'm not sure where they've done on that from, because they've only just started out, but anyway, that's probably come off the English Amiga board. Big shout out to those guys. And then a full feature called the 25 years of the Amiga CD32. Now this is actually really, really good, and I wish I'd had this before I ended up doing the CD32 special, because there's a few bits in there I think I missed out on. I've no idea where they got this information from, because it was such a pain in the backside to get all the right stuff, but they go into all the release packs. I mean, I think I was able to find out about 2 of them, but one I missed completely. Oh, what a pain. Loads official sales figures, things like $10 million, the amount Commodore International owed for patent infringement to CAD-Track. 87 is the number of CD32 games with CD audio. This is packed with decent stuff, full articles on the full motion video bits and the history of Commodore and how it affected them, and yeah, it's it's a pretty good magazine. My only, because I have to pick problems with things, I'm afraid, but my only problem with it, and it's not a major one, the A to Z section of CD32 games, I mean, that's about 5 or 6, maybe 7 pages long. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just flicking through, I've got the mag in my hand. I mean, it's alright that they've gone back to these older games and stuff and done reviews, and they've like the big things like Alfred Chicken, big things, Alien Breed 3D, because they're going through them all in alphabetical order, but I would hope, as maybe we could do with some more articles, or there is an interview in here, sorry, I didn't mention that before, with Team 17's Martin Brown. I'd love to see more stuff like that, and I just worry that with the magazine only being 39 pages that they've pushed other content out to do an A to Z, but again, that's not a gripe because the writing is fine within these. It's just I just want to see other stuff because there's loads of CD32 things that I'd like to see them cover, and I just hope that again they haven't pushed anything out to cover that. But they really have done a fantastic job, and I would recommend that you go and pick a copy up of this. It's $4.99, and it does look like they do worldwide shipping. I will stick a link into the show notes, but by all means, go and check this out, guys. This is not a huge publication, it's done by a small group of like Amiga CD32 fans. We're a very small community, and stuff like that really does need some support. By all means, it has my recommendation, so go and pick a copy up. And that was the main theme for Rainbow Islands. Now, I will have to ask at this point, I'm assuming you guys are all still okay with me front-loading the music. Rather than stick it in the middle of the episode, I thought it'll remind people, it'll give them something to clutch onto when they first start listening to the episode, and I suppose we can refer back to it later. But, I'm interested to hear your comments. One person did contact me via the website. Big thank you there. I think he was called Chuck. Just to ask if I was going to put any more of the soundtrack into the episode. Now, I did have a good think about that up front, but then the problem is, and I'm trying to keep these to about half an hour for a show, and if we get into a situation where I'm putting like some games have like 15, 20, 25 minutes of tracks, and the episode would never end, so I'm going to stick to the main theme, and I might dip in and out of other themes depending on the show. Now, you might be wondering, why has he gone and picked Rainbow Islands? Now, this is something I was very familiar with as a kid, as I'm pretty much sure everybody was, but the first time I ever played it properly was on the ZX Spectrum, and I had it on the Plus 2. I think there was a 128K version with all fancy extra graphics and things like that. But I do remember as a kid, I was absolutely addicted to it. I think I bought it was one of the big expensive games. It must have been about £10 at the time, and I'm sure it came in a fancy box. Anyway, the graphics were as good as they could be for the Spectrum. It was all very well designed, it wasn't bright and colourful or anything like that, but it's interesting to think of the version I was playing to death when I did get an Amiga later, but I don't really think I played Rainbow Islands anywhere near as much as I did on the original 8-bit version. Let's dive right in. It was published by Ocean, who were responsible for games like A-Train, Batman the Movie, Chase HQ, all of the Strike games, Desert Jungle Strike, New Zealand Story, some real classes there. Mostly all the movie tie-ins. I mean, Ocean were like the EA of the day. I'm sure I've said that before. They were an absolutely huge company with some absolutely stonking titles. It was developed by Graftergold, who also did Fire and Ice, Paradroid 90, Realms, I think I've mentioned that before, Simulacra, Virocop and Uridium 2. Those are all pretty big Amiga titles as far as I'm aware, but I might be a bit wrong. I think a few of them are also like a sequel to Commodore 64 games. Now, it came out in 1989, although there was some delay and it seemed to spill out into 1990, which we'll get into a bit later. It was only on one disc. It was fully compatible with the A500. It was up to 2 players and was priced at $24.99. Pretty standard pricing for the time. Coder was Andrew Braybuck, and he pretty much did the game on his own. He's been involved in games such as Bomboozle, Virus Alert, Simulacra again, Paradroid 90, Virocop, lots of big name ocean titles. Again, I'd be going on for ages if I dug into his full gameography. Is that the right word for it? The graphics were done by John Cumming. He was responsible for Stunt Car Racer, which we've just covered recently, Simulacra, Paradroid 90, and Ivan Stewart's Super Off-Road Racer. It hasn't got a racer on the end, but that's a very good game, very similar to Indie Heat, and one of those ones I do like to dabble in from time to time because it's a very, very good arcade game. It was a pretty small team that worked on this. The music was done by just one guy called Jason Page. He did Flight of the Amazon Queen, which we covered a very, very long time ago. All the tunes in the Sensible Soccer games, or even SWAS, Putty Squad, Rough and Tumble. He's quite a prolific music guy. He's got loads and loads of games that he worked on. There were multiple conversions or ports, if you want to call them that, and it was pretty much one of the, I don't know, it was not one of the worst, but one of the most crossbred games I've ever seen. I was trying to get a list of things just to read out of the different versions, but it's everything across all the 8-bit and the 16-bit systems. I mean, it even stretched as far as the PS1 era and PlayStation 2 many, many years later. It's probably been re-released a million times because I don't tend to look at the modern stuff. I suspect there's probably some sort of special out there on the DS or even a remake on PS3 or PS4, but PS2 is about as far as I will go. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, this is the sequel to the classic arcade game Bubble Bobble. It's based on the original Taito arcade game, which came out in 1987. It does have a sequel known as Parasol Stars that drops the main weapon in this one of rainbows and switches over to umbrellas. I've played that one. I can't say I'm a fan. It's not really my sort of thing. Now, there is a bit of a weird situation that happened when this was being developed and was due to come out. I mean, it effectively ended up sat in a cupboard somewhere, dumped for ages, because they delayed the Amiga version for several months. And it was something to do with, like, confusion about the rights for the game. It was originally being developed, I think, by Telecom Soft, Graphcold, I think, the main developer, and then Microprose came in at one point and then bought out Telecom Soft, and there was a huge argument about the rights. Taito stepped in to say, oh, no, we own the rights. I mean, you know, they claimed it fully, and then there was some sort of arguing between the three companies. No one could decide, and it just got chucked in the back of a cupboard. And then Ocean came along after, I think, someone there had seen the demo of this and seen it in action, and we're really keen to get it on the market. And if it's Gary Bracey stepped in and argued the toss for it, and it ended up getting a full-on release. And as you'll see later, just thank God that he did. Reading through a few interviews, in particular by Andrew Braybuck, who actually did a full-on article about some of the history of his games, and he was talking in detail about how Taito actually provided an original arcade cabinet for this, and at the same time they provided one of the most intensive graphics books he'd ever seen, you know, listing all the sprites and the maps and things like that. And it's one of the reasons why the game across any system looks as good and feels as good as it does compared to the arcade original. I mean, this was not the norm at the time. You'd be lucky if they could go and visit, say, an arcade game sat somewhere and they'd be recording it on VHS tape and then trying to recreate something to go that far back. But no, they actually sent a full-on arcade cab over. They were able to work all sort of wonders for it. And from what I could tell, all versions across this were worked on at pretty much the same time. Even though it stretched back about 2 years and you had all the licensing and stuff, they pretty much all got sat in a big room with this huge, massive team of multiple people all working together on the different versions. And there was a lot of cross-drawing and cross-art and stuff, I suppose, with the music as well. And it all just came together and worked beautifully as they made a full-on product across all these different systems. And I'm sure I'm simplifying that far too much, but this is a podcast. I can't go too in-depth with all these details. Now, a couple of things I discovered about the game. There's no hardware sprites in the Amiga version, and that's due to the characters having to display in front of the main background and behind waterfalls. I mean, the Amigas, I think, is well known for its hardware sprites, but this doesn't really take advantage of it. There is some cheat codes for the game, but they were quite sneaky with it because they knew people like to use these. But if you do use them, they bump the difficulty up massively. Not so I think you'd notice straight away. It's as you got further and further with the game. So it's probably a bit pointless using them whatsoever. You'll have to get good at the game yourself, I'm afraid, guys. Now, one funny story I did find out is the developers across all the versions were actually given a big award for this over in Europe. But it turns out that someone who went to collect it over there actually managed to abandon it in a nightclub. In other words, they got a bit too drunk. And later on, just by some amazing coincidence, it just turned up. It was slightly damaged and knocked around the corners and stuff. This was not the sort of thing that developers at the time were saying and getting. And Andrew Braybrook said they were so proud and chuffed to bits to get this. And I think it's probably still sat on a shelf to this day in his house. He doesn't say that in the interview, but I suspect that's what happened to it. Of course, having an arcade game, you're going to have the most amazing story possible, especially if you're just viewing this up close in the arcade. But the story for this goes: Bubby and Bobby set off to rescue the inhabitants of the Rainbow Islands, who have turned into bubble dragons by the evil boss of Dark Shadow. They must collect the big gems and mirrors on the 10 Rainbow Islands and defeat the boss of Dark Shadow to return the islands to normal. That's pretty much it. There's not really much more in depth than that, and it's not like, say, Pac-Man, when you've got like these nice little cutscenes and things going on. I'm afraid there's no princess or anything like this. This is basically a huge treasure hunt. The game itself, it's not your typical arcade platformer. It is a 2D platformer, all sprite based as you'd expect, but it scales from the bottom to the top. You have to basically make your way up through the level. There's very few bits on the actual surround. You've got score at the top with high score in a little black bar. There's lives displayed at the lower left if you're player 1, lower right if you're player 2. And these take the shape of little thrown rainbows. Nice and simple, nothing fancy there straight away. The entire point of the game is pretty much to scroll all the way up, scale to the top, using your rainbows to climb. You throw them, trap baddies underneath, and then just collect items and power-ups as you're going. Again, this is an arcade title. There's not much more to it about that, but it's all about the challenge of exploring each of these levels. Now, they aren't levels in your typical sense. There's 10 islands in total with 4 stages on each. These take the forms of Insect Island, Combat Island, a Monster one, a Toy Island. That's things like water pistols, something called Doze Island, awesome Simpson name, Robot Island, and Dragon Island. And each is themed in particular to match the level and the surround that you get. But this isn't just a matter of let's scramble our way up nice and slow and take our time. If you take too long, the stages will actually begin to fill at the bottom with water, almost as if the island is sinking. So you really have to get a move on. You can't be exploring these massive levels. They're no left and right, it's straight from the bottom to the top. So you've really got to be on the move very, very quickly. The controls are quite simplistic. They do respond really well. The character's not very speedy. It does feel a bit like a person just warbling along, but I quite like that in a way. Even though it's really, really rapid, you're not like Sonic sort of speed, darting backwards and forwards really fast, but it does have just a bit of running speed to him. It's up to jump. Fire will use the rainbow. I'm not a fan of up to jumping games. I suppose I'm used to it because I used to play them, but it can be quite quite annoying. You can upgrade the rainbows as you're exploring, and you can chain several together and up to 3 at a time. That in itself can become absolutely crazy because these rainbows are almost twice the size of the character, and they're like little hills that appear, little curved hill, half-8 rainbows that appear in front of you that you go running and dashing around, and if you run over one set, turn around and fire back the other way, you can turn and run over them, and that's how you basically work your way up with the odd bit of platform bouncing in between. Despite being able to run over them, if you jump in the air and land on one, the rainbow will sort of dissolve and disappear. It will not take any weight on it whatsoever. The idea is you've got to move really quickly. You can spurt across a couple of these, keep firing off in various directions. If you fire one and there's an enemy in front of you, it will get trapped beneath, and if you jump on the rainbow, the enemy will die, or it'll start getting really angry and angry until it dies. It's quite weird and odd, and I've never really seen anything about like this before. It's a very, very strange weapon. Having mentioned the islands, I did forget to mention that there is actually 3 secret ones that you can discover if you collect 7 gems, which are hidden throughout all the levels, which adds to that sense of, there's more to explore, there's more to do in the game, and you can pretty much learn where things are as you're playing, but it does give you the sense that the game is a lot bigger than it actually is. One of the oddest things to talk about for this game, I thought, is the graphics are so colourful and bright and cheery. I don't really know how else to put it. It's a very cutesy type of game. I mean, we are a little guy running about firing rainbows anywhere, and as you can probably imagine, it's very colourful and bright, and it all matches that sort of environment. But all of the levels are just full of various enemies, but one thing in particular, there's loads of sweets and sugary things and cake and flowers all dotted around, and you get points as you collect those, but there really is a vast abundance of this stuff. It's like finding gold. It's everywhere. You find it in chests, you open the chest, it goes all flying out in the air, spurting everywhere. It's like a cake orgasm. I've never seen anything like it, especially in a game before. One of the greatest things about this game is the variety of enemies that you actually meet. And with each island being a completely different zone, you might think, oh, well, they're probably going to repeat 2 or 3 enemies throughout. No, every single island has like 6 or 7 different baddies, and you don't get repeats from the different islands either. And that goes for the bosses as well. There's some real effort gone into the design in there, and it's all, again, I keep saying it's bright and colourful because I just haven't got the words in my head that will put across just how amazing this actually looks. There is a boss which appears after every 4th level. You've got things like a huge spider, helicopter, a vampire, which sort of looks very similar to the main character but with a cloak on, this robot type thing, a dragon which appears towards the end. Now, the bosses themselves, they're probably almost 2 to 3 rainbows tall. They're like huge sprites stretched out. It looks very, very bizarre, but they take up a lot of room. They move at a fair old pace. A lot of the time they've got different weapons, and they use an area to match where they are. You don't fight them within the level itself. It's always within a contained area, and you're stuck and you're bouncing around several platforms, and you just have to avoid their attacks. Now, they use very similar patterns, but it's not as easy as that might sound because they do fill up the entire space. They will swoop over and round you, and they will swoop in to attack, and they really do use the areas quite well, and it does add to the difficulty. As I'm sure you heard earlier, there is a very, very memorable piece of music that plays throughout the entire game. It's sort of I think the accusation's been there, it's sort of a rip-off of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It does sound very, very similar if you twist it slightly in your mind, but it's a great piece of music, and it's very, very addictive. Even before I started recording, I was still humming it in the back of my mind. Usually I do like an audio test, and no, I'm not putting it at the end. I do like a proper test just to see how things sound, and all I was doing was humming myself to that tune. It's absolutely fantastic, but at the same time, the problem is it pretty much plays throughout every single level. There's not like different bits of music per stage. There's a few things dotted around, like a boss jingle when the time's running out and the water's about to flood flooding, it sort of speeds up the music and it's a different sounding thing. Also when the level finished, but these are like jingles. It's the same sort of thing that you get very, very briefly at the end of adverts. It's nothing amazing, but that main song is with you constantly. And I think the official version is probably about a minute and a half long, so there's not a lot of difference there going throughout that song. So I would say maybe it might become annoying after a while, but it's so addictive. It just sounds so fantastic. Again, it's so cheery and wonderful and happy days, and it just works brilliantly. Luckily, the sound effects do not suffer from this. There is lots of variety mixed in here. They're all very nice and very well done. I don't know how to describe this, but when you throw the rainbow, it makes a very, very satisfying sound. I'm sure if you could throw rainbows, that's exactly how it would be. It's very, very odd. I've not heard it before. It's not like, say, collecting a ring in say, one of the Sonic games, but it's got that similar sort of a tone to it, and it's very quick and it's fast, and it's almost like it's about to jingle. There's also a nice sound of boots leaving the ground. Again, I don't know. I'm terrible at describing sound effects, but it works really well for this. If it only happens when you jump, so there's no pitter-patter of feet. It's not like, say, in the Prince of Persia where it's constantly running across the ground. All of the enemies have their own like little nice sound effects. It's great. They really have done a lot with this, and it's almost as if they've realised that the music is either too repetitive or there's not enough there, so they've stretched out as much as they can and done some great sound effects. One of the other things I did notice about this game is there's a load of power-ups that you can get. Most of them don't do much beyond increasing the chains of rainbows that you can have. But again, that's only up to 3, so it's not a massive number. But I didn't see at any point where the Amiga was struggling to display lots and lots of them on the screen. It's really well done. But you can get things in power-ups for like extra speed, the speed of how you can throw the rainbows and run back and forward, lots of points, bonuses, exploding stars, stuff like that. And there's no like invincibility, but what I mean by the exploding stars is if you're in the middle of a screen and you collect one of these, it's a big yellow thing, it just goes boom, and all these red stars go anywhere. If there's enemies on the screen, they are killed within an instant. It's a screensaver basically, but you can't collect them to use later. You can only use it when you run into it. If I've not said it properly, I will say it again. There's a hell of a lot of variety to this. The graphics are absolutely fantastic. It's all very well drawn. As an arcade port, it looks, especially on the Amiga, it looks really well. I mean, my big thing about this as a kid was I always played it on the Spectrum, and this really is a step up above all of the other versions, especially on the 8-bit one. But then, this is a 16-bit computer. I suppose it's only to be expected, but they really have gone overboard with the way the entire thing looks. The variety of the enemies, the way the bosses are, all the islands. In between the islands, you actually get to see an overhead map of, it's something like out of Super Mario World where you could see the different parts of towers and islands and things like that. It's that sort of a graphic. It looks absolutely amazing. Very bright, very colourful. It can be quite a difficult game. I really am trying to find some problems here. But the thing is, it never feels unfair. I often got in situations I was getting frustrated and tossing the pad aside and that sort of thing, but you can never get in a situation where you're stuck completely. You can always turn around, come back to it later and have another crack at it. It does work very well, and you will get past it eventually, but it does take a fair bit of skill. But there's no sort of clipping, there's no like dodgy collision detection or anything like that. It's very well programmed and very well set up, and the design of the levels actually move how quickly you move throughout them and the way you can use the rainbows. There's lots of big spread out platforms, and you've really got to be smart how you span the chains across and move your way back and forth. I really am struggling this week to find problems with this game. There's nothing else like it. It's just a brilliant conversion straight away. It all just works. It's very well tied, very well drawn. Beyond the difficulty, there is very little problems with it. I didn't get to play the 2-player, I'm afraid to say, but the fact that it's got a 2-player mode and the first player version is a lot of fun to get into, it just works great. And the controls match up to what's happening on the screen. Even if you play it with a keyboard, usually a lot of games, especially these days, because you think, oh, I've got a pad, I don't need to go back to them. But I always try it out just to see, just in case it's any different. And it really does work well, even with the keyboards. Everything responsive, it moves perfectly. You can be tapping backwards and forwards and moving very quickly, chucking the rainbows about. It just works great. Yeah, and that's probably the shortest bad points I've ever done for one of the episodes. Now, moving on to the magazines, CVG gave this 96%, Amiga Format 95, The One 94, Amiga Action 86%, Amiga Computing, which is probably the lowest at 80%. Finally, Amiga Power gave it 96. To add to this, Amiga Power also declared it to be the greatest game of all time in 1991. Now, they also followed this up in 92, and there seemed to be some controversy with this at the mag at the time, because a lot of people saying there's a lot better games than this coming out. You know, they were comparing it to things like the Monkey Island stuff and all these other big games, and I think it was like a maybe F1 Grand Prix and something. All these big titles have come out and they were like, nope, it's all down to Rainbow Islands. We love this game. We think it's absolutely amazing. In fact, Retro Gamer magazine in issue 9, going back to 2004, I think I was still in college at the time, they actually voted it as number 30 in their best games of all time list, and that was voted on by the readers, but even they had to agree it was right up there as one of these all-time amazing Amiga games. You know, it really did well, especially for the time. As a game, I mean, it feels absolutely huge. I said before, there's only 10 islands, and there's 4 per island, I suppose, and you've got the secret islands mixed in there. But just the way it's all built, there's tons of secret rooms dotted around, lots and lots of bonuses, and yeah, a lot of it is points driven, but compared to other points based games, there's not as much to do, especially for the time, as there was within this. You can really explore the levels, and the great thing is there's not a lot of randomly generated enemies. They're usually in the same-ish area when you come to them time after time, so you can learn the levels all the time, develop your skills at it, and really pass through it quite quickly. But even on a rush through for those expert players, you're still probably looking at about 50 minutes to an hour. And again, for an arcade title, that's a hell of a lot of content, and you know, especially for something like this. Out of all the Amiga arcade ports that I've played so far, you know, this is amazingly close to the original cabinet. I mean, I think I played it myself going back a few years now, but it's a very good game, even it's an original form. To me, I think it's much better than the original Bubble Bobble arcade, because there's just so much more to it, and this is as close to arcade perfect that you could get for the time. Now, one of the other things is it does have up for jump, which is always one of my annoyances, but the great thing I noticed when I was testing this out for footage is the WHD load version actually has a hack. So if you want, and you've got a 2-button joystick, you can use that. So you can be firing your rainbow on one button, and then you can jumping and springing around on the other without using up. And that doesn't sound like anything major, but when you're going to have a proper hard blast at this and sink some proper time into it, it's much better being able to drop the up and then use the button, and it just really adds to the game. So yeah, if you're going to play this as an addition, I would certainly recommend the WHD load one with that hack. As I'm sure you're aware by now, I think the graphics on this are absolutely fantastic. You know, there's so many colours, everything is so well drawn and defined, you can tell exactly what it's meant to be. It's all very colourful and cutesy, and it matches the worlds well, and there's so many sprites, there's so many extra things to collect. Each level looks packed to the rafter with extra things. I've really never played anything like it or to this degree. It's a very simple game. There's not much to it. It's an arcade port, but it's got so much going on within each of the levels. It really does feel like it's pushing the Amiga overboard, and it's like one of the high-end type of games. It isn't. It clearly isn't, and yes, I know that. But when you look at it and you're bouncing around and there's rainbows everywhere and there's all these extras and you got things like the bosses and the baddies and stuff, the levels are absolutely packed with content, and there really is nothing like it. It really does hold up well, and it feels like a proper arcade classic, and I would say that in the sense of putting up there things like Pac-Man and Space Invaders. It really does hold up well, and I can fully understand why it's in so many game of lists or top 10s and 20s and things like that. And even back in the day, they were absolutely raving about this as being something special. Now, you might not be into this sort of an arcade game, it might not be your thing at all, but I would still say it's well worth going back to. There's not many games, I don't think, to this degree, and that's the great thing. I had loads and loads of fun, much more of some of the other arcade ports I've been playing on my time on the Amiga, and this really does hold up beautifully well. yeah, it's just loads of fun and highly addictive. And again, I would highly recommend you put 5 minutes aside and go and have a blast on this. I promise you will have a good time with it. And with that, I think that's as good a time as any to finish the show. If you have any comments about this episode, you can pop along to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AMIGArama, AMIGArama.com, or at AMIGAramaPod on Twitter. Now, as always, I would like to put out a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. They are Adam Bradley, Figgy/CTZ, Graham Vebke, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Retro Ravi, Sneff, and Treble. Now, these guys really do help with the cost of the running of the show. It does cost a bit from time to time, of course, because I'm doing this on a weekly basis. As I'm sure you probably realise now at this point in the episode, we've got a brand new mic and sound setup and stuff, and this is all thanks to the Patreon supporters and stuff. I won't be able to invest as much time or effort and stuff in the kit for this show, big thank you. And again, even if you can't offer support and you want to do something a bit extra, then by all means, please share it either online or Twitter, or even just come along to the Discord page and the Discord chat room, which as always is in the show notes below. Until next time, guys.